Morning. Oh, sorry, afternoon. Get it right. Because there's lots of things that you pass the salt. Same thing with. Yeah, can you use the bathroom? Sure, you can. Now, I don't know how you went to school, but when I did, they would say that, then stop. They think that's may I use that. But yeah, so we're going to be looking at things like that next week. It's kind of in the realm of practice. That How's everybody? Must be okay. You made it in. Nobody had to drag you in, probably. Well, maybe. I'll get three in a row. Kendra. Jen. Nope, missed. But Ariana's not far behind. There we go. And let's see. Marpa. Yeah. Wrong end of the room. I'm going to get this together. No wonder I'm so confused. To make it up into the room. Well, I guess we can play the electric. But somehow I did. No, I'm going to collect homework today. Last one. Well, I shouldn't say that because if I say this is the last one, you may not do the other. But that would be unwise. And so, let's see, I believe it was a short one, C and D, correct? Out of the textbook. I think that was last week. No. Okay. Okay, yes, certainly. And I think we gave you credit for it, right? Yeah. Because I wrote it down either way. Yep. Here. Oh, there it is. They got to be smarter than the paper. Hard. Today is the 26th, so if you mark that down on there. And I bet if you crack the book, they probably sit there staring at your both same face, so there's no partials today, right? And there you go. Cool. All right. So that takes care of that part. Now, one thing on the projects, the thing that I noticed, I mean, I got a lot of pens. This is where I found people losing points. Had to go back to the statement I made several times, and that was, don't tell me you're just going to tell them to practice. Because if you just tell them to practice, they think they practice alone. And if they're making mistakes in that practice, if all you're doing is go practice by yourself, they're going to continue to make the mistakes and not really recognize the problem. So that was the one place I think where I noticed people making errors. Probably everybody probably got 5 out of 5 on the first one. The way I graded it was, if you gave me a good one, I gave you a point on the first part. So one for each one of the five that I requested. And on the back, since I only asked for four, they were 1 1/4 each. So that was, that was the one, only place I really thought about the problems. And remember, and just give it a thought in terms of, you have these people that have to learn English, and turning them loose with themselves probably isn't going to do it. Somewhere in there, they need something to help them, whether that's audiobooks, which we heard several people mention of audiobooks, television and radio and music, practicing with another proficient English speaker for things like phonology, and even for things like writing and reading. Phonology, I got a lot of people talked about working with somebody else on morphology to break up words into pieces and make sure you explain it that way. That would work for me too. Hi, you're getting better. Oh, another new one. Is that the one? That's the one from last time. See, I paid attention. You do the homework? All right. Now, so let's see. All right. So if you would pass them this way. I'll just pick them up on this end. 1/426. Thank you. Okay. So what's happening on Thursday? Study time. I'm not going to be here that day, but I will be available for office hours via cell phone. Exactly. I have set it up so that the study guide will become available under the practice exams folder at 1 o'clock in the morning on Thursday. I'm also emailing it to you at 1 o'clock in the morning on Thursday. Please go over those, use them, and practice through the stuff that's there. And once you've done that, we will talk about it first thing on Tuesday next week, just before we launch into pragmatics. Okay? Any questions on all of that? We're good? Okay. And what are we going to, oh, yes. Well, pragmatics, Tuesday, you should read chapter, this page. Actually, I changed it to 2 through 9. What is that? Read chapter 2, 7 to 21. Wow. You're going to love what I did for you on that week. It's going to actually be 2 through 9, I think, 4 through 9. But you'll see it on my updated, my red ugly page in just a minute. But basically, we're not going to do the whole chapter of pragmatics because we just don't really have time. But I want to hit up on some of the things that are more important and things that you'll run into more likely with your students later. It's questions like, Sebastian asked me this morning, well, can you pass me the SALT semantics or is it syntax? Right? You're sitting at the table, say, can you pass me the SALT? You expect somebody to say yes or no? No, you expect them to pass the SALT. Well, that's more of a pragmatics issue than it is either semantics or syntax, because it's going to be very
focused in on the context of the conversation. We're going to look at several examples like that. Something that is called implicature. We, as we sit around and we talk about things in English amongst ourselves, people don't have to say exactly the right thing for us to understand what they mean. Now, that's not necessarily true with our students, right? Because they may not understand what we're implying or inferring from other people's discussion. And that's where we'll go when we talk next week about pragmatics. Here's the deal. I want you to finish up E, F, and G. Those are three more short exercises. And I think I just looked at that and I don't remember ever why I would have said 4 to 27. But all we're really going to be looking at in terms of the test is going to be 4 through 9. Now, pragmatics is very interesting. You may want to read the rest, but the part that we're going to focus on, because it really would impact our students more likely, it's just going to be 4 to 9. So you should read 4 to 9 before you come into class on Tuesday. No class on Thursday. Syntax will be an email or on D12 by Thursday at 1 a.m. My office hours on Thursday are just going to be at my cell phone. And then here's what we're going to be covering on the test. We'll be covering chapter 4, pages 47 to 63. That's the part that you read. The 2 Herzan and Adams readings that we sent out there in place of some of the remainder there. Chapter 3 is going to be 26 to 39 and 4 through 9 in chapter 2. Okay? So that's where we're going to go to kind of wrap up next week. And then we'll have, I don't remember now, I think it's Tuesday morning. I think it's Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. I don't remember, but is it on there? Okay, Tuesday. And so it's a 2-hour class, so 10 to 11:50. We'll just do the final exam in here. It won't take anywhere near 2 hours to do. It'll be a lot about the same length maybe as the one we did at the midterm. Okay. But this one's going to be focused on semantics, syntax, and a little bit of pragmatics, but very little. Pretty general stuff on the pragmatic side. Okay. So to what we're going to talk about today in semantics will be there. But before we go there, let's go ahead and just talk about the exercises that we had for today. And those are exercises C and D. E, F, and G is what we'll do for next week. Okay. So let's take a look. Chapter 3, exercise C is on page 33. And if we look through these, we were talking about sense, kind of meaning, and the relationship between various words last week. Today we'll be talking about reference, which is slightly different, but still related to the meaning. But if we were to talk about the sense relation, what is common among chair, sofa, and desk? If you were going to talk to that and come up with things like, I don't know, synonymy, hyponymy, overlap, etc., what would you call the relation between chair, sofa, and desk? Nobody want to guess? Hyponymy, I don't think so, because a chair and a sofa and a desk, the desk kind of falls out of the hyponymy, right? Unless you were thinking of what was the next superordinate. If you give me the right answer, I'll have to say, oh, that's a good one. The next higher level, if we were looking at chair, sofa, and desk, it would be what? What would be the next higher level? Probably what you were thinking. Anybody? We're thinking of this in terms of hyponymy. What would be the next level up? Huh? Furniture, yes, we could do it that way. So if we were thinking in terms of the next level up is furniture, we could come up with hyponymy. But there's another way we could do this, and it's very similar, wrapped around furniture. What's the other relationship we might deal with? Kendra, go ahead and tell us. You don't know the word? Okay. How about Ariana? How about Jen? What did you write down? Yes, furniture. That's great. So what sense relationship though? Furniture is a great one. So furniture would really drive hyponymy, and it could also drive overlap. Okay. But the more I think about it, I kind of like Christina's hyponymy more than I like the author's overlap. Either way, basically, we see a whole bunch of things that are in common, but not exactly the same. A chair and a sofa are pretty close to the same. Desk kind of blows us out of there, unless we're thinking of something like furniture and hyponymy or overlap. How about hate and despise? Hate and despise. Diana, what did you write down? Synonym or synonymy. Okay, synonyms or synonymy. Synonymy, that would be great. And how about book, magazine, and pamphlet? Book, magazine, and pamphlet. See, that would be a perfectly good answer. It's not what the author said, but that's okay. We don't care what the author says. He's already made his money on this thing. Hyponymy would be good. What would that next level up be? If you're talking book, magazine, and pamphlet. All right. What's the next level up? No. We overlap is one way we could look at this. And the other way we could look at it is hyponymy if we think that next level up is printed materials or reading materials. All three of these, book, magazine, and pamphlet, overlap on the idea of being printed. They're also, if we think about the next level up being printed materials overall, we could think of it as hyponymy. So I'm going to have to be real careful when I ask those questions, on the test. I think either one of them could be right. The author's view was that it is overlap. But now that you guys have set me straight, I think hyponymy is a better answer. Okay. Anyway, we'll figure that out. What sense property is illustrated by the word bar in George Passed the Bar? Most of you are young yet. You have to pass the bar. Not you. You don't have to pass the bar. But what could pass the bar? What kind of a sense issue might we see there? I'm getting so lonely here. Here I am and lonely in a crowd. Homonomy. That you could probably call it that. You could do exactly that. The author was calling it lexical ambiguity, but homonomy would be one of those places because we looked at bow and bow and bow and bow. So I'm going to live with that. Not a bad answer. But the author said that it was basically lexical ambiguity. But you're right. I think homonomy would work very good. It's either passing the bar exam or passing the bar tavern. And so without knowing what you were really, the guy passed the bar. Well, if he's an alcoholic, he passed the bar, yay. And if he's a brand new lawyer and passed the bar, Yay, either way would work. All right, now we're going to get to something a little more straightforward. We are looking at different kinds of antonyms. Remember, we had multiple kinds, even though when we were kids, we went to school, nobody really brought this up. They just said, hey, we've got opposites. Warm is the opposite of cool, or hot is the opposite of cold. But that's not really very good, because how cold does cold have to be the opposite of how hot does hot have to be? So in this case, we had three kinds of antonyms to talk about. Binary antonyms, which are literally opposites at different ends of the spectrum without anything in the middle. We've got gradables, which are, it's really kind of hot is gradably opposite of cold, but we've got all kinds of places in the middle that are making it a little bit difficult. And then finally, we've got converse, where the action kind of reverses the other. So let's take a look at wide and narrow. Wide and narrow. What kind of an antonym would you call that? Andrew, you looked at me, so I kind of look at me and go, I'm thinking, oh, you must know the answer. You put what? Converse? I'm sorry. Yeah, but no, not converse in this case. There's a better way of looking at that. Wide and narrow. You may remember I said there were tests for these, and one of those tests was to say, can I put very in there? If I can put very in there and it still makes sense, that would make it a gradable. Cool. So gradable is there. How about smoking and non-smoking? Diana? Binary. It's either smoking or it's not smoking. There's not kind of not smoking, and there's not kind of smoking. You're either smoking or it's non-smoking. Unless you go to China, which I found in hotels in China, you had non-smoking rooms until you asked them to bring you an ashtray, and then it would become a smoking room. Wildest thing I ever saw, but that happened. But generally speaking, smoking and non-smoking would be binary. Near and far. Gradable, because we could say very near and very far. Let's see. Defeat and lose to. That one's an interesting one. What did you put? Converse? Exactly. You can defeat somebody or you can lose to them. One team is going to defeat the other, and the other team is going to lose to the first. So that's one where we've got this idea of it's kind of flipping it over. Innocent and guilty. Innocent and guilty. What do you think, our pod? Cool. Binary, because you're either innocent or you're guilty, right? All right, so that one is a good, clean, obvious binary. And then we've got wife and husband. Electro girl. Converse, very good. That's an excellent one. And how about in front of or behind? In front of or behind? Lorraine, I know you don't have it written down, but. No, not probably. Very in front of and very behind. I don't think so. It probably would be converse, right? One undoes the other, is the opposite that way. Okay, did it go beyond that? Oh man, it does. It goes over onto the next page. Criminy. True and false. Mandy. True and false. This is H. Binary, very good. How about open and closed? Ariana. Huh? I could see where you might come up with that. You could open it or close it and they'd be kind of different, but the author was looking at it as binary. But I could see your argument. Look at that. See how smart you guys are? You can argue good stuff. They make money, you can argue the point. Okay. Debtor and creditor, Kendra. But not a bad answer. But there is a better one. Kind of like husband and wife. Converse. Okay. This is my favorite of all. Sebastian, I know you don't have this written. Deciduous versus evergreen. Deciduous versus evergreen. Why didn't you put it there? Tell me the truth. What were you confused about? See, this is the good one. See, this is one of my example. When you run into a word on there, you don't know what it is. Do you know what deciduous is? What kind of tree? Okay. Deciduous. But this is the point. It's the one, deciduous trees have the leaves fall off versus the plants that always are green because like pine trees and firs and all that, the stuff doesn't come down. It's always green. It's a good idea if you don't know to look the words up. I know we don't want to do that. And quite honestly, I'm not going to lie and say I look up every word I don't know, but sometimes it's a pretty good practice. Okay, so that one would be binary. Teacher and student, Diana. Okay, cheap and inexpensive. Oh, wait a minute, cheap and expensive, Jen. G for gradable, why? How cheap or how expensive? Very cheap and very expensive. That will give us the answer. Man and woman. Man, that'll get us in a world of hurt anymore. Isabel, what do you think? You put what? You know, somebody could probably say that nowadays, but I would think before, what would that be? Arpod? Binary would have been the thing. Now, when we've got to take into consideration transgender issues, then we might, I don't know whether gradable would be. Maybe you wouldn't even call them opposites anymore, but let me not digress and go there too far because I don't follow the news. Nonetheless, it's an interesting thing as society changes, suddenly things that were black and white, 1 and 0, on and off, male and female don't seem to be considered that way anymore. All right. I will try not to give you any of those just to trick you on the test. We're going to move over now to this other part. We want to look at identifying a prototype. And we said that a prototype would be the very typical member of a particular category, right? A very typical one. And then there might be those that are very non-prototypical, which would be very different. So galley, if I'm looking at car over on the next page in A, can you give me a prototypical car? An SUV, perhaps, okay. Now give me a very non-prototypical car. I'm sorry? Couldn't think of one for that. Can you think of a non-prototypical? What? Oh, okay. So you got the instructor car where the instructor's got his own brake pedal. Got that. Give me another one. Something, that's a good one. I don't mind that. It's not a bad answer. Not one that I expected. Anybody? Don't remember that. Do you remember? Oh, the Batmobile, exactly. The Batmobile would be a very atypical car, as would, what was that guy from the lifeguard thing? Pamela Sue Anderson was there. Well, there was a car called Kit. Anybody remember Kit? The car, the talking car? What are we doing, Kit? We're going really fast or whatever. There he is. It's up there. Okay, so that both of those would be atypical or non-prototypical. How about a prototypical house? Christina. Prototypical house. Okay, maybe an apartment. What would be a non-typical one, Cynthia? A mobile home, perhaps. Okay, I could see where those would work. I also would think, okay, I've got a ranch house and I've got an igloo, or I've got a colonial style and I've got a shack, or maybe a tent. In any case, those are good answers. Which of the following deals with a particular entity in the real world? Which of the following deals with a particular entity in the real world? Arpod. Prototype, I did as well, right? You need to know what something really is to be able to come up with a very prototypical or a typical example. Great. In number 3, you look up the word aardvark in a dictionary and find a written definition accompanied by a picture of an aardvark. It could be argued that this dictionary entry relies on, this one's hard, both sense and reference. That would be answer C. The man John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan are related to the term President of the United States as follows. Would you come up with an answer? No, Isabel, what did you try out there? Hyponyms of President of the United States. I suppose that's pretty good, particularly though if we called it presidents of the United States. And I know that's a pretty pitiful exclusion, right? But if we said presidents, then they would definitely be there. What else could they be? B, that's the one that the authors also wanted to use. Kennedy and Reagan are part of the extension of presidents of the United States. All of the presidents would be there. If we could call a president, each one would individually be a president, but we could extend it out to everything that fits. So B is a good answer. B is the author's answer. The word robin and the word bird are related as follows. What is that relationship? Robin to bird. I am now at Ashley. C is hyponym. That one's really good. That is the correct answer. Why wouldn't we say bird and robin overlap? And I think it's mainly because that bird is a much bigger concept. And it's not just that they have robin stuff in common. It's much bigger than that. And then finally, consider the following description. Chases cars, barks, is about 2 feet long, is covered with fur, wags its tail when happy. This is a Mandy. I don't think it's a hyponym. Stereotype, exactly. And now I realize that should have been harder than it should be, because I'm talking about stereotypes and prototypes today. Oh, what a bummer. But see, you can learn on your own. You don't need some dumb old teacher to tell you what's what. Right? That's something to think about too. What happens when you get out of college? Stop learning, right? No, that's when the learning really starts. And unfortunately, a lot of that is going to be unguided learning. You're going to have to work your way through it on your own, which is why sometimes I give assignments that I haven't covered yet, just so you get some practice at doing that. This was not purposeful. I just did it by accident, but hey, I can give you an excuse. Did everybody make it onto the attendance sheet? Everybody with homework's giving it to me? Great. So let's go in and cover what you already know now. Just so I can waste your time right here. I'll give you some new stuff, I promise. All right, here we are. So this is the second part of semantics. The first part was sense. We talked about sense, and it was largely meaning and relationships between words or relationships at a word level. Now we're going to talk about reference, and that is the relationship between a linguistic expression like cat and the objects in the real or imagined world that it refers to, right? And so for some reason, we arbitrarily, somewhere along the line, somebody in our English heritage decided that we would call that thing a cat. Somebody else, in thinking about it in Spanish, decided, nah, cat ain't gonna be good, because we don't have an ass sound. So we're gonna call it a gato. And if it was somebody who was Russian, they decided, man, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna call it oh. And then if you really want a weird one, then you go talk to the Koreans, and they decided that for some reason it should be called goyang. Who would have ever thought we could call a cat goyang? But gato, cat, goyang, all refer to the same basic thing. So those are, that kind of shows us how arbitrary language is. We have something called linguistic reference. When we use a linguistic expression, oftentimes we have a very specific understanding or meaning of what that thing refers to. For instance, we could have clock and we could have Timbuktu. Now I'm thinking about clock in the sense of a verb. Like I clock into work, I clock out of work, right? That would be, you do it actually at a box that has a clock on it. You normally stick your card in or swipe a card by it. And that would be called clocking in or clocking out. Clock, pretty literal. And then there's this place called Timbuktu, which is in the country of Mali. And it's a real place. So if I'm going to Timbuktu, literally this must be the place I'm going when I clock into work. On the other hand, I could also have speaker reference. This is what the speaker means by that word in this context, oftentimes kind of pragmatic related. Clock. What's another way I could say clock as a verb? Yep. That's when you really hit somebody. Sometimes they'll call it cleaning as clock, but normally you could just clock them, right? Now, that's a speaker reference. You probably wouldn't find it in the dictionary. Maybe you would if they've got a slang section or something. But if a speaker says, I'm going to clock you at work, well, it could be that he's going to clock you in, or it could be that he's going to punch you. Hopefully it's the form, not the latter. And Timbuktu. Where is Timbuktu? Timbuktu tends to be someplace you go, you use in an expression to just talk about someplace far, far away, perhaps someplace that you'd never want to go or be. Timbuktu. I'll send him off to Timbuktu. Well, it probably doesn't mean you're going to give him a passport and a visa and send him to Mali. It just says, get him out of here, right? So linguistic reference and speaker reference is kind of like something we talked about before, where we had linguistic sense, dictionary meaning, speaker sense, what the speaker is referring to. Princess Diana was a princess, but some stuck-up person walking down the street might also be called princess if the speaker was talking sarcastically about that person. So oftentimes for us, native speakers, proficient speakers, it's not all that difficult to follow. For English language learners, man, that stuff is pretty cut. Now, let's talk about reference. Some definitions of the reference. That is the entity that is identified by a linguistic expression. Linguistic expression being basically a word or a sentence, right? So the entity that is identified by the linguistic expression. The board. I got the board. I've got this desk. I've got that light. And so in all of those cases, you can tell basically what I'm talking about. That light, this board, and this desk. However, we also have this idea beyond just a plain old reference is an extension. We saw that a minute ago when we talked about John F. Kennedy and who was the other one? Reagan. Exactly. They were both presidents of the United States. So the extension of president of the United States or presidents would be all of those people who have been and are currently president, even though we might refer to each individual one as a president. It's a little confusing sometimes, but that's basically the idea. Reference is the thing that's being identified by a word. Extension may be all the potential or possible references that that word might relate to. So I went from the board, this desk, and that light to lights, desks, and boards all over the place. And the boards don't necessarily have to be blackboards. They could be pieces of lumber in a lumber yard. They would all fit. Okay, prototype. We've talked about prototype. Let's look at an example. If I tell you, and this is not a hyponymy example, and you'll see why in a minute, but this red circle represents all birds, okay? And what we want to do is try to figure out where different kinds of birds fit into this particular diagram. For instance, if this is the most typical bird down here, and this is the least typical bird, where would you put penguin? In the middle or at the outer edge? Probably the outer edge. Why? Because they don't fly, they swim, they live in the Arctic. They're just atypical, right? So I would do that too. How about a hummingbird? Lorraine, where would you put a hummingbird?
No.
Way out here or in here somewhere? In here, one of these two probably, right? Because it flies. It's a winged animal. It's got a beak, which is kind of goofy because it's kind of long. And the thing that's atypical about them is they hover as opposed to just fly, but they fly and hover, right? How about an ostrich? Where would you go, Jen? Probably. I don't think they do. Towards the outside, I would agree, because they're just not like regular birds. They got really long legs. They run real fast, but I don't know that they even fly at all. They got eggs that are. You ever seen an ostrich egg? Stork, Diana. Storks fly. With a hummingbird, okay, you could. There's no reason. I just pulled out this one, but basically the idea is it's closer to the middle than an ostrich or a penguin. Maybe not as close as some of the others. Where would you put a robin? Okay, let's see. Ashley, where would you put a robin? Dead in the middle, would you not? Okay, do you live in the city? We've been through this before. How many of you don't live in the city? 1, 2, 3. Would you say a robin is a typical bird? Me too. I would agree. So Ashley's got us all squared away, and we are sitting there with robin dead in the middle. How about a hawk? Ariana, where would you put the hawk? Would you put it in the middle? Okay, I wouldn't, but that's okay. Now, because I was thinking this is something that eats other stuff, goes in and swoops down and grabs a mouse or squirrel. No little children don't have hawks that big. Okay. Although I did see something on the internet the other day where a monkey tried to kidnap a baby in China. That was pretty wild. Now you know how I spend my time. Now, for all you city people, suburbanites, go out to where I live. You don't have it. But in the city, what's your prototypical bird? Pigeon. That's my thing. The idea is there are some things that are just absolutely dead on what you would think of when you think of the word bird. Robins and pigeons come to mind for me. But there are others that are way far away from it. Technically, a penguin's a bird, but I can't call it a prototype. Here you go. So now we've got something else. We want to come up with a stereotype. We're not talking about stereotypes as a bad thing. We're just talking about the definition of the word. And so if we were to go out here and say, all right, I've got birds, I've got dogs, I've got men, I come up with a list like this. Birds, feathers, wings, beak, they fly, they nest, they lay eggs, they got 2 legs. Standard bird, right? That's basically the characteristics. Some of them are blue, some of them are gray, some of them are have red chests, some of them don't. But the things that make them typical is this. The dog, we saw the dog in the exercise in there. They bark. They have snouts, most of them. Of course, the pugs are a little bit goofy. They got smushed face, but most got a snout. They have tails when they're born, even if we chop them off for some reason. They tend to be meat eaters, although mine loves lettuce. And 4 legs, fur or hair, teeth, and paws. Would you agree? Basically. Now, for all the women in the room, you can look at men. Now, Arpad and Sebastian and I may not look at it like this. Right? Okay, yeah, 2 legs, deep voices most of the time. Bipedal, that means we walk on 2 legs. But some of us don't think we're annoying, and some of us don't think we're needy. But you guys might. Right? Somebody laugh. Just for fun. Stereotype, so it's basically a list of characteristics. Now, co-reference is something that we run into again. It's kind of similar when we talked about presidents of the United States. In one case, we looked at presidents of the United States and we said, hey, we could do hyponymy and put in every president's name. We could do some other things, but co-reference is another place where we might think of the same basic idea. 2 or more expressions, 2 or more linguistic expressions that refer to the same person or thing. Okay, to the same person or thing. They have the same reference, so they refer to the same thing, but they're not synonymous. Any way you can think through this? How could we do that with thinking about presidents? Any idea? Well, how about if we took the idea of there's a dude standing there who says it all depends on what is. That was his famous line. Former president of the U.S. And we also could call him Bill Clinton, right? He's standing there. We can see him. We can call him former president of the U.S. We can call him Bill Clinton. Both linguistic terms talk to him, but they're not the same, right? Because how about if I do this? How about if I say there's George Bush sitting over here in the corner saying mistakes were made. He's former president. He's George Bush. The problem comes in when we start to realize that both of those are former presidents of the U.S. Therefore, this former president of the U.S. here it's this guy and this one is here. So they refer to the same thing. Two things referring to the guy in the corner, but they're not synonymous because it gets kind of confusing when we start to see we've got multiples. Same thing happened with Isabel's hyponymy when we talked about presidents. We talked about Reagan and JFK. Geez, you guys got to see, this is what happens when you get old. Short-term memory, it's gone. Okay, stay young. Once the confusion comes in, though, they're not the same. And so the same thing with the hyponymy there. We could say former presidents of the US as a group. We could put all of these guys in there. Which one would be prototypical? Who would you say? If you had to think of a prototypical, the perfect president, there probably isn't. They're also very different. Right? How many do we have? 46? So there's 46 entities that we can fit in there as 45, we can co-reference as that. All right. The project leader is refusing to help. The jerk thinks only of himself. Who is the jerk? Yes, who is himself? Oh, the jerk or the project leader. So basically, we got three terms in these two sentences referring all to the same, but there's lots of jerks, there's lots of project leaders. So this is the idea of co-reference. Now, I do want to talk about anaphora. Sometimes this gets in the way of good conversation or clear conversation. So we can say anaphora, a linguistic expression referring to another linguistic expression in the discourse. In the discourse meaning, let's say, just call it the conversation. A linguistic expression referring to another linguistic expression in the discourse. Any ideas? This sounds a lot more technical than it is. We use this all the time. Any thoughts? Pronouns would be a perfectly good example. We go in there and say, John is walking across the room. He just turned around and walking back, right? So in one case, it's John is walking, and then we turn around and we later refer to me as he. So we get in there often, and then oftentimes it's post-reference. But how about this? Mary went home early because she was sick. Does she refer to Mary? Probably. Does it necessarily? What if I said Mary's daughter called? No, the nurse at Mary's child's school called. Then when she said Mary went home early because she was sick, who is she referring to? Then it would be the daughter, right? So in this particular case, we can't necessarily tell, but our first inkling is to go, if this is all the information we've got, Mary is here and she is being used to refer back to Mary. Why do we do that? Mary did it to herself. Now, in this particular case, we've got nobody else it could be, right? It couldn't be that Mary did it to herself and herself is somehow Sally. This is why I always get so upset when people say, and yourself? Okay. Right? Mary did it to herself. This one's clear. Mary is the actor, did something, and she was also the recipient of that. But if I said Mary gave it to her, well, we don't know if, well, we know that her must not be Mary, but we got no clue as to who it is. This is the thing that drives me crazy sometimes. Is people will start a conversation and they know exactly who or what they're talking about, but they start off with he went there. And I got to stop. Who is the he that you're talking about? Or it was really good. What it was really good. You can run into that, and I bet you've probably had to do that as well. Stop somebody and say, okay, who is the he or what is the it? Because they're so tuned into what they want to talk about, they forget to leave you with the antecedent there, the thing that should come first. Here's one that's a little different and more difficult. John went to Spain but Sally didn't go there with him. We can have multiple of these kinds of references in there. John is number one, and he's also represented by him way over here. And Spain is number two, and it's referenced with the there. And we do that oftentimes. John went to Spain, but Sally didn't go to Spain with John. Perfectly grammatical, not very conversational, right? And so we typically do things like this. So the big reason, one of the reasons we use this anaphora idea is to simplify what we're talking about and not be repetitive. So we can take an example. To simplify and avoid redundancy, let's say that I start with person A says, I lost my hat. Who lost it? Person A, right? And lost what? Their hat. Now, person B says, I thought, is this the same I? No, now we've gone to another I. This I's become you, right? I thought person A gave it to Karen, it, my hat. So we've changed this out. I has now become a different person, which is something we'll talk about in just a minute. But this I has become you because he's talking about it. And we're not going to say, I thought person A gave the hat to Karen. It's just easier to say, I thought you gave it to Karen. I did give it to her, but I got it back yesterday. And why did she return it then? Who's the she? Well, it's still Karen. What is the it? My hat. And then, what does then refer to? Doesn't have to be in the same sentence, but it needs to be somewhere in the discourse or the conversation. She's talking about then being yesterday, and she didn't want it anymore. So we do this kind of thing all the time. The big problem comes in. Sometimes your students are going to need to be reminded. We have to be able to say who these people were or what these things were before we start talking about them using pronouns. Now, one thing is it's not always really simple. Here's an example where we have the antecedents in there, the things that are said first, and the anaphora relationship, but it doesn't necessarily become clear. I saw Bill and Larry walking down the street with popsicles and ice cream bars, and he gave me one. Have you ever heard somebody say something like that? What do you have to do then? I saw Bill and Larry walking down the street with popsicles and ice cream bars, and he gave me one. If you're really interested, what are you going to say? What a funny thing. Yeah. And so you might go like, who gave you what? It's just, this isn't enough information. Well, in this case, maybe you don't really care, but in other cases, this kind of thing comes up. For instance, Sam and Sally were at a party with Bill and Jan, and they gave them a ride home. Who gave who the ride home? If they were at a party, and they had an accident on the way home, it could become important to know whether it was Sam and Sally or Bill and Jan who was driving. Right? So it can become important, but it's a little hard to follow. And then Jim told them, this is the one that I hate because everybody just like, they did it. We told them, and who is the they and the them? It's not always clear. Now, there is a slightly different view of this. Anaphora says we are going to be having something that comes first that we can refer back to. All right? So Jan drove him home. And I should do that. Jan drove John home. She has had a car. Well, we know that the anaphora has already been mentioned. It's Jan. But there's also a case where sometimes we'll have something called cataphora, which is basically the same, except that it's referring to something that comes later in the discourse. I'll just give you an example down here. Mary gave the vase. Oh my God, yeah. Okay, Mary gave the vase to her, but Sally didn't like it. Could you say that? Would you understand what was being done? If that's all the information you got in that sentence, the fact that her and Sally are so closely related in the sentence, I mean, spatially related, you can easily tie that stuff together. So this is that idea of the chapter. Even though he liked the party, he is referring back to Dave left early. So sometimes it does happen that way, but it needs to be somewhere close. Otherwise, it's very difficult to understand what people are talking about. Now, a moment ago, right here, I lost my hat. Person B can't call me I, right? I thought I gave it to Karen. You can't use I there, right? I is this person if he's talking, but it's this person if he's talking. That may not strike you as particularly strange, but we have this idea of something called deixis. And deixis, or words or utterances that are deictic, it's the semantic meaning is fixed. What the word itself means is fixed. But who it is referring to or what it is referring to depends on the time or the place of the speaker. Another way of looking at an expression has one meaning, but it refers to different things, entities, depending upon the speaker's space, where the speaker is located, or something in the temporal environment. So examples, UI there, here, there, right, and left. How many times have somebody, it's the one on the right, you're right or my right? You do that all the time. That's a deictic statement. You both know what right means. It means this. But if you're standing where our pot is over there, his right and my right may seem a little bit different, right? It says it tells me it's on the right. Your right or mine? It's over here. It's over here. So that's another one. You and I already talked about, right? In that other example, I gave my hat to Karen, and the other says, I thought you gave it. And right and left, we did here and there. That's a big here and there, especially across languages. Different languages will talk about things different. I'm coming. And other places will say, I'm going. I'm going there. I'm coming home, or I'm going there. And you see it in telenovela, where I noticed it. People in Mexico would always say, yo voy, when somebody knocked on the door, and everybody here would have said, I'm coming, right? So we get this weird thing across cultures that don't always act the same way, but here and there, come and go are interesting thoughts. Here is kind of a picture. Depending on who is talking, we have to use different words. I means first person singular, and when I say I, it means me. But this person can call it I and call me he. And this person could call him he and me you. And it all depends on where you're standing in this thing. What's the coolest one for time considerations? What's the one you've heard ever since you were a little kid? Tomorrow. Tomorrow. I'm not talking about the end. Where's the name from? Tomorrow never. Is this something only old people do? Tomorrow never. Huh? Arrives, yes, we usually do it in one syllable. Tomorrow never comes. Why? Because when tomorrow gets here, it's no longer tomorrow, it's today. My mother used to do this with me all the time when I was little. I'd say something like me. She said, you can't be me, I'm me. You're you. Freaked me out. She didn't know that there was such a thing called deixis. She just used it. That's why it turned out this way. Nonetheless, time, yet before. Well, yesterday wasn't before yesterday, it's now. But if I talk about it today, it's before, and tomorrow never comes because when it gets here, it'll be today. Dykes, kind of an interesting thought. Now, I like that one just because it's interesting, but here's one couple that are really important. Connotation. We talked about this last time when we were talking about meaning. We said connotation, some words may seem like they're synonyms, but they carry some emotional baggage with them. All right. For instance, cheap versus inexpensive. They both don't cost a lot. They should be synonyms, but there is a connotation to cheap that is negative, whereas inexpensive might seem positive. We could say summer. For a Chicago person, summer is what? Amazing. Amazingly bad or amazingly good? Amazingly good. If you lived in Phoenix, what is summer? Hotter than the blazes and probably not necessarily very pleasant, at least during the day when it's around 120 degrees, right? So even something like this, because Chicago in summer means one thing. It's got a connotation of this is awesome. And the reason it's awesome is it's not winter. And then we've got the guy in Phoenix who says, this is not awesome because it's not the fall, the winter, something that's more comfortable. Denotation, on the other hand, I want you to be clear on the differences between these because they're both meaning-based. Connotation has kind of a mental or emotional associations with it. It could be super positive or super negative. Denotation, on the other hand, is the core sense or meaning of the word, the things that you would see in the dictionary, for instance. Up here, summer for a Chicagoan is awesome, and over for the guy in Phoenix, maybe not so much. But normally the denotation is summer is that season that happens between spring and fall, or it's June, July, and August, right? Very different. So connotation carries this emotional baggage with it. Keep that in mind. Denotation is basically just the core regular old meaning of the word. We've got metaphors. And metaphors don't really refer necessarily to the thing that you're describing it as. We might think of time. Well, time is, there's time. There's just a fixed amount of time. We don't know how long it is, and how long we're going to live, but we've got a certain amount of time, right? Heart stops beating, time is over. But how can we waste time then? Or how can we save time? How can I save time and live longer? I can't. How can I waste time and die earlier? Probably ain't gonna. But we take time in something that is absolutely fixed. We go out there and we act like it's a commodity that we can waste or we can save or we can spend. Emotion as a spatial thing. How about emotions? I'm up today. I'm really down today. Are you really up? No. Are you really down? No, you're kind of like, I'm just right here, but my feelings may be kind of, my emotions are such that I want to say it's a really awesome day or a really crummy day. And health can work the same way, right? Peak of health. When are you at your peak of health? Man, when things are really going good, you don't have any illness, no infections or anything else. Or you're in top shape. That shape is right up here at the top, or I'm sinking fast, or I'm down in the gut. But we use the health as a spatial thing. We're not really at a peak, or we're not really in a valley. We may use the terms that way. And then sports is war. This is my what my mother always. You heard here about my she always hated when we come home from a baseball game and say, we killed them. We destroyed them. Now, and the baseball team that I was in, we never won a game. So it was always they crushed us. They smashed us. They slaughtered was the word that we always used when I was about 8 years old. We didn't know things like annihilated, but we did know slaughtered. And man, they slaughtered again. So suddenly we've got war things or killing things that we use in sport. And then we've got true things. This is the third part. This is the final part of semantics that we're going to talk about. Two basic types of truth that we can deal with. One is at a sentence level. Is this sentence true or false? And that's the part we're going to deal with. There's also the kind that is probably more dealt with by philosophers than linguists, but it's intersentential truth. It is, if this is true, this must be true, or if this is true, this must be false, etc. How do we take two sentences and determine their truth based only on that? We're not going to deal with this part, but we are going to deal with this one just briefly. And there are basically three kinds of truth, or three kinds of sentences that we could look at. They're very simple, and I'll tell you this is going to be on the test, so you make sure you want to make sure you go through this part. Analytical sentences are necessarily true simply based on the definition of the words in the sentence. Just the words make this true. Okay? So we could also say it's knowable by knowing what the words in the sentence mean. Here's three examples. Ophthalmologists are doctors. Is that true? It's true in every case, right? If you are called an ophthalmologist, you are also a doctor. If, dogs and cats are mammals. Is that true? Is a dog a mammal? Cat's a mammal? Mammal some kind of an animal, but dogs and cats certainly fit into that category. That's an analytical sentence. It's true. And if Joe was killed, Joe is dead. Unless you're people from like baseball team where we got killed, but we still live. But generally, in real terms, if Joe was killed, Joe is dead. You understand this idea? Analytical sentence. Every one of those words makes this thing all come together, and it's obviously true. Now, the opposite side of this are contradictory sentences. And in a contradictory sentence, for the same reason, these are necessarily false. Essentially, you know what the words mean, and they can't possibly go together in a true statement. So some examples here. Ophthalmologists are not doctors. Well, that's got to be false because we know ophthalmologist is a doctor. We could say a colorless liquid is blue. Is a colorless liquid blue? What color is a colorless liquid? Huh? No color. That's what colorless means, right? So if we've got something that's got no color, it can't be blue. And then finally, a bachelor is a married man. Is that true? No, that's not true. So basically, we look at the words and we can recognize this is true or this is not. The first one was analytical. The second one is contradictory. Analytical is true by definition. Contradictory sentences are false by definition of the words that are in them. And then we've got this last one that we have to pay attention to, and these are called synthetic sentences. And synthetic sentences may be true or they may be false depending on empirical facts. What's really going on? Okay? They're knowable because by knowing both the meaning of the words and something about the world, the empirical facts, right? You know what's going on. You can take the meaning of the words, you can take what's going on, you can figure out, is this true? So here you go. How about this one? Ophthalmologists are rich. Is that true or false? Or who knows? Huh? It's somewhere in between, right? We don't know. There's got to be a poor ophthalmologist someplace. I mean, maybe it's an ophthalmologist that does all of his work on a charity basis and doesn't get paid anything more than the food he eats. Somebody like Doctors Without Borders, right? Just because he's an ophthalmologist does not make him rich. She is Christina. spelling aside, she is Christina. Is that a true or a false statement? Well, it's true if I'm going, she is Christina. But it is false, as you've all noticed all semester long, if I say she is Christina. It's a synthetic thing. I have to look at the very basic empirical facts to know whether it's true or not. Maybe most ophthalmologists are rich, but not everyone probably is. And I have one Christina and I've got a Cynthia. I can't swap their names around and make it so, right? It is spring, so it is warm outside. Is it spring? Is it warm outside? Was it warm outside on Saturday? If I said that sentence on Saturday, it is warm, so it is, I'm sorry, it is spring, so it is warm. True statement, right? If I say it today, it's not. I'm wearing a stocking cap under my helmet. I'm wearing gloves to ride home. It's like, it's just not warm. Synthetic means it depends not only on the meaning of the words, but also the empirical facts that those words relate to. Sometimes it's different from time to day to day, but you have to look at the specific situation there. Is everybody going to remember this one? Because we got Christina and Electro Girl, Cynthia, right? Got your name right. It wasn't just because I said Electro Girl. Here's the homework, buddy. Remember, nothing on Thursday. Just grab that email and do the study guide, bring it in for Tuesday because we're going to go over it. Office hours, here's some stuff to make sure you're covering as you get ready to take the test. And note that this is a little bit different than what was in your syllabus. It's shorter. Are we good? Okay. All right. Well, you have a good rest of the week. I'll see you on Tuesday. Talk to you if you call me. Right to you, you're right. Okay, you got a question on the superlatives and comparatives. That is absolutely true. That's a good catch. Right. Yeah. So I just, I went off of the assumption that there's more than 60 and so there's one of the large airports. Yeah. You know what? That could be perfectly good. Right. But I knew what you meant. It would have seemed more reasonable to say one of the large.
Yeah.
Beauty. So there's ways you could have gone about it. It could have been a perfectly good.